Ann Patchett is the author of 6 novels, The Patron Saint of Liars, Taft, The Magician's Assistant, Bel Canto, and State of Wonder. She's written 3 books of nonfiction, Truth and Beauty, about her friendship with the writer Lucy Greeley, What Now?, an expansion of her graduation dress at Sarah Lawrence College, and most recently, This is the Story of a Happy Marriage. The new book is a collection of essays that covers how to qualify to be a Los Angeles police officer, drive a Winnebago, weather a painful divorce, care for an aging relative, care for an aging dog, hide out in the Bel Air Hotel, start a bookstore, and love a nun. Plus, the lessons of the title piece, Why You Marry Someone You Said You Wouldn't. She also gives a tutorial on both what it's like and what it takes to be a writer. Those of us who are passionate about books love Ann Patchett for more than the books she's written. 2 years ago, after her hometown of Nashville lost its only bookstores, she decided to step into the breach and opened Parnassus Books with a partner, Karen Hayes. It was less a make-or-break business risk than an investment in her community and a pulpit from which she can preach the gospel of the book. And Parnassus is doing quite well, thank you. Ann Patchett lives in Nashville, Tennessee with her husband and their dog, Sparky. Please join me in welcoming Ann Patchett to the JCCSF.
Hello. Thank you. Hi. Oh, how nice of you to come out. This microphone, Barbara, this is fabulous. I feel very liberated. I'm not a podium person. I actually do this without notes, and I feel like if you stand behind the podium, you don't get credit for doing it without. People always think that it's written on your hand or something. Does anybody here know Alan and Nancy Saturn of Nashville, Tennessee? No? Okay. Usually there's somebody in every audience who knew Alan and Nancy Saturn. They were my neighbors. They were sort of famous Nashvillians. And I've been thinking a lot about them lately and thinking in terms of karma. And when I open my front door of my house, I'm looking into Alan and Nancy Saturn's front door. Karma is a word that I sort of feel embarrassed about using, although I think probably it's okay to use it in San Francisco without feeling weird. You know, just thinking of it very, very much as action, how action progresses and moves forward in our lives. If you do something good, you know, something good happens. If you do something bad, something bad happens. Like if you smoke for 20 years and you quit and you feel really bad about it and you start doing juice cleanses and everything is behind you, you still smoked. So if it catches up with you later, that is sort of the physical enactment of what happened in your past. But none of you smoked. And gosh, me neither. Alan and Nancy Saturn were these phenomenally good people. They were generous and loving and open-hearted and welcoming, and they had 1 million friends, and they had 3 great daughters, and they were always having parties, and the house was always open. Everybody loved the Saturns. They were loving people. And they both died about 6 months apart from one another. This was probably 3 years ago now. And in the year that they died, they both died of cancer. In that year, you couldn't get a parking space on our street because around the clock, 24/7, that door was open, people were pouring into the house, and the party that was their life and the celebration of how they loved and how they lived kept going forward. And they were, it was the first time that I sort of realized kind of what karma actually meant in how you live your life. So about a month ago, Madison Smart Bell, the writer Madison Smart Bell, called me, and he'd been reading Christopher Hitchens, so he was a little bummed. And he asked me if I believed that there was such a thing as goodness, for goodness sake. You know, or if, as Christopher Hitchens always kind of said, Mother Teresa wasn't a good person. She was a person who really enjoyed working with lepers. And so her emotional reward came from doing that work. She wasn't doing it because she was good or altruistic. She was doing it because that was her pleasure. And therefore, it kind of doesn't count. And so Madison says to me, what do you think about this? And I said, that's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. You know, what matters is that you do the good thing. And if you get any pleasure or a reward for it later, great. I mean, I'm all for that, but that you have to actually do it. So this is really me thinking about karma and about altruism, because I did some things that I thought were very altruistic. And this is kind of how they wound up playing out in my life. My sister, Heather, in 2003, was the vice president of Converse College, which was a little girls' a woman's college, excuse me. My southernness shows up every now and then. A woman's college in South Carolina, a small woman's college, not a college for small women, in South Carolina. And when she got there, there was a girl named Nikki Castle who was 19 years old, and she was the sophomore class president. And she, on the first day of school, saw my sister walking across campus, and she said to a friend of hers, "Who's that?" And they said, "That's Heather Patchett, that's the new vice president." And Nikki said, "Well, then she needs to meet me because I'm the sophomore class president." So Nikki walks over and she introduces herself to my sister, and my sister winds up hiring Nikki to be the babysitter for Heather's children. And my sister's children at that time were Wolverines. And they kind of, you know, whatever. Any good thing that has come in their life is largely to do with Nikki Castle. So Nikki really became part of our family. She would come to Nashville and visit us when my sister came, and we all really loved her. She'd never been on a plane. You know, she was a real small town girl, very smart, lots of personality. And when she got out of school, I sent her to the Columbia Publishing Program because I really thought she was meant for bigger things. And not that South Carolina isn't enough. But, and Nikki said to me, "This is so great. It turns out every year they accept exactly 100 students to the Columbia Publishing Program. And mysteriously, somehow this year they accepted 101. Which all goes to show you've got to know the right people. Then when she got out, I got her a job with my agent at International Creative Management in New York. And there she was, a young New York career girl. And she worked in New York at ICM for 4 years. And it went really well. Whenever I would go to New York and see my agent, I would see Nikki, I would take her out to lunch. She would still come to Nashville every now and then. And then, you know, time passed. And when she would call, she would be mopey, and then she would call and she would cry. And she would call more and more, and she would cry more and more, and she wasn't happy because she was a very friendly, outgoing person. "Hi, I'm Nikki Castle." And New York was really wearing her down. Being poor was wearing her down. People not being friendly was wearing her down, and she wanted to get out of New York. And this was hard because she had been training to be a literary agent, and the only place you can really do that is New York. So she said she didn't know what she wanted to do. She had some debt. She was 26. She wanted to start over again, and she wanted to come home to me. Now, I don't have children. And one of the reasons I didn't have children is because I didn't want them to come home when they were 26. And I was like, you know, your friends went to Atlanta. What about Charlotte? There are other big southern cities. You don't know anyone here except for me and, you know, my mother. She said, "No, I really want to come to Nashville, and I want to live with you, and you know, I want to start over again." And we went back and forth, and you know, it was just one of those things. It was going to happen. She was crying all the time. I love her, and I was very altruistic. I thought, this is something I have to do. I've got to do this good deed for my friend. And so she moved to Nashville, and she didn't have a job, and I told her that she could come and work for me until she found a job. And she moved into my house. And it turns out that didn't last very long. She did find an apartment pretty quickly, but she was looking for a job, and I've never had an assistant. I have a lot of writer friends who have assistants, and they're always telling me I should get an assistant. And I'm always kind of interested, but I didn't really know what they would do. So after about a day and a half, we had completely run out of stuff to do. Like, she had reorganized the wrapping paper, she had refiled the receipts, she had changed some computer programs. She put all of my bills on auto pay, which I would never have been smart enough to do. And then I started to teach her how to cook. because she didn't know how to cook. And then I started taking her to the gym. And it became clear really quickly that I was becoming Nikki's assistant. And we were both struggling. You know, she was really trying. She wanted to get it right. So she came in one day and she said, I found a project. She found in one of my closets this big Tupperware bin that I have. It's like yay big. And it was full of all the magazine articles I had written in my life. And every time I wrote a magazine article, I would rip out the pages that my article were on, and I would rip off the cover, and I would throw them in the bin. And she said, this isn't good. This isn't where you want to keep your life's work. She is 26. It must be digitalized. So she said, I'm going to scan everything, and I'm going to get archival sleeves. And I was like, great. This is a good project for you. Go for it. And I bought her a scanner, which was like $80. Who knew? I still don't know how to use it. And she begins to scan, and then she comes back a couple of days later, and she says, now I know what I'm going to do when I'm working for you. I'm going to put together a book of essays. And I said, I have no interest at all in a book of essays. Now, hang on right there. Nikki Castle, scanning, back up. When I got out of graduate school, I had two skills. I could teach, because when I went to Iowa, I got a teaching assistantship. So when I was 21 to 23, I taught undergraduate literature and creative writing. And then the other skill that I have in life in order to support myself is food service. So I was a novelist, I was a fiction writer, that wasn't going to cut it. So when I got out of graduate school, I got a job at a little school in Pennsylvania called Allegheny College. And I got a job as a writer in residence. I quit that job very abruptly, and then I got a job as a waitress back in Nashville at a TGI Fridays, where you had to wear a hat. But I was the first person in the whole history of the restaurant to score a perfect 100 on my waitressing exam. Anyway, so these were the two things. You know, I know what I want to be. I want to be a fiction writer. I want to be a novelist. But I have to make a living. And these are my two options. I can teach. Now, the problem with teaching is that teaching is a sponge, and it expands to fill up exactly as much space as you have in your life. So if you teach one class or if you teach 8 classes, it doesn't make any difference. There is no time. Now, you have a lot of energy. It's not like you're wearing yourself out or anything, but there's always somebody wanting something, needing something, and I always felt like I had to read another book or do more prep. So that was really never very good for fiction writing. Food service was really good for fiction writing because I had my head clear. You can tell me what you want for dinner, I can remember that, and I can still make up a novel in my head while I'm getting you your margaritas. But the problem is when you get home at the end of the night, just flat on your face because you're so exhausted. So what I was looking for was a way to make a living. And the way I decided to make a living was by writing nonfiction, by doing magazine work. I had published a couple of short stories in 17 magazine when I was in my early 20s, and I started to ask my editor if I could get a nonfiction assignment. The first nonfiction assignment they ever gave me, and this is pretty adorable, was a 200-word book review. 200 words is like the size of 4 postage stamps in a row of a first novel by a young woman named Amy Tan. So I wrote the seminal book review for the Joy Luck Club for 17 magazine. Then I worked for 17 for 8 years. It's just logical. If you write fiction, maybe you'll get 1 short story in a year. But if you write nonfiction, you could have a piece in every month. So I was always pitching pieces. For every 10 pieces I wrote, they would maybe accept 1. They would make me rewrite it 10 times. They might take that, they might not. Every editorial assistant, the janitorial staff, everybody got to write in the margins. You know, it wasn't like that for me when I was 16. And I got very tough. I went on to write some American classics, like When the Chemistry Isn't There, Surviving the Breakup, When Your Sister Reads Your Diary, How to Decorate Your Locker. That was me. And then my friends from college got jobs. Many of them stayed in New York. They went into the magazine business. My friend Erica Buxbaum from college got a job as the editor of Bridal Guide. She didn't really like to hire writers, so she let me write the whole magazine every month. I had 6 pen names. And actually, the great thing about writing for Bridal Guide is that unless you're really a freak, the whole audience turns over every 2 years. And they actually pay you in cycles to run the same articles over and over again. So, you know, I move around a lot. I'm not going to carry the burden of 1,000 pounds of Bridal Guide on my back. I'm going to rip it off and throw it in the bin, rip it off and throw it in the bin. I was very happy writing junk. I could write this stuff as fast as I could type it. I could just write up an article about how to get cake toppers that actually look like you and your husband. I was an incredibly unethical journalist when I was at 17. So if I was writing about, you know, teens and drinking, it would be Polly, not her real name, says that when she was 15, I just made that up. I didn't even know you weren't supposed to make that stuff up. I never talked to teenagers. Rip it off, throw it in the bin. Now, it was fine that I was writing junk because my fiction was for real and it was serious. And I was a writer who took my craft very seriously. I would never sell out in fiction, but all I wanted to do was make the maximum amount of money in the minimum amount of time. So it never made sense to me as a fiction writer, why would I want to spend 2 months writing a piece on global warming for The Nation when I could spend 45 minutes writing a piece for Glamour about loose powder versus pressed powder or whatever, and get $2,000 for that. This is not rocket science. My goal is not to be a nonfiction writer. But what changed is that my editors grew up and they got better jobs. And my friends wrote for different magazines and you'd meet different editors at a party. So, for example, my friend Lucy wrote a piece for Vogue because she met an editor for Vogue at a party, and then she introduced me to that editor, and then I wrote for Vogue for years. And then that editor went to GQ, then I wrote for GQ for years. And then that same person went to the New York Times Magazine. Now I'm writing for the Times Magazine, but her friend, who I also went to graduate school, worked at Harper's. See, this is how it works. All of a sudden, I'm writing very smart things for important American publications, not because I am trying to, but because these are now the assignments that have come in. Also, really, it was just a matter of growing up when you think about it. I started at 17, and then I grew up, and I went through Glamour and Mademoiselle, and then kind of on to Elle and Vogue and the classier ones, and then Bridal Guide, all of these. And then one day you wake up and you're reading the New York Times and the Atlantic, and so that's it. So in this one Tupperware box is the good, the bad, and the ugly. And Nikki is finding things that she thinks are good, not in the bottom of the box, but up towards the top. And what's interesting is that I have done some reporting pieces in my life. They were fine, but they weren't memorable in any way. The stuff that I was writing in nonfiction that was good was extremely personal stuff. That seems so strange to me because my fiction is completely divorced from any reality of my life. In fiction, I really pride myself in being somebody who makes everything up. You're never going to read one of my novels and know more about my parents. But in my nonfiction, I'm writing things that are very personal and very close to home, and I'm publishing everything. And it doesn't really matter to me because I publish in such a wide array of magazines that nobody really is going to find all the parts, because a GQ reader isn't reading Bridal Guide, isn't reading Elle, isn't reading the New York Times. And so I feel kind of safe putting myself out there. Meanwhile, back at home, back with the bin and the scanner, Nikki goes through my computer. Really glad I don't have any secrets, and redoes a bunch of files, and she finds the original pieces, and she organizes them into the book, and she makes a book, and she hands it to me, and she says, this is going to be your book of essays. Now, at this point, I discovered 2 things. One thing I already knew. Of the many psychological problems that I have, one of them is that I can't read my own work. Now, I've never read any of my books. Somebody today, I did an event today at Book Passage, and it was a guy. I don't get a lot of guys who read Patron Saint of Liars, but a guy raised his hand and he said, in Patron Saint of Liars, the first section, the introduction, takes place in the present tense. What were you trying to do by setting something in the... And he's going on, and I said, sir, I'm sorry, could I stop you for a second? And he said, yeah. I said, when did you read this book? And he said, well, I read it a long time ago. But he said, I reread it maybe 2 weeks ago. I said, I'm going to be 50 next week. I wrote that book when I was 26. That's the last time I read it. So if you've got any questions, ask yourself. When you finish writing a book, you have to read it so many times. You read and read and read and read as you go along, correcting, editing, changing. You give it to your friends, they make notes, you put those notes in, you read, you send it to your editor, you read, you send it to the copy editor, you read, page proof, pass proof, typos, final blue pages, and it is dead to me. I never think about those books. I never want to see them again. They never cross my mind. People are always saying, Gen and Roxanne, do you miss what happened to them? I'm like, they're yours. They belong to you. I don't care about them anymore. So this is, as it turns out, it's also true of my nonfiction work. So I just, she gives me this book and I can't. I mean, it's like I keep opening it and thinking, I can't read this stuff, because this is the second thing. It also turns out that this is how I have dealt with my psychology for my life without realizing it. That something would happen to me and I would write it down and I would sell it to a magazine and the magazine would get published and I would take the magazine and I would tear the pages out and I would put it in the bin. And that is my life. That's my mind. And I don't know how people who aren't writers live with their life, with the burden of their life. My grandmother, I take care of her for years. I love her. Every day I take care of her, and she dies, and it's a relief, and it's a sadness, and I write it down, and I publish it, and I rip it out, and I put it in the bin. I break up with my boyfriend and we take a Winnebago trip and we get back together and later we get married. It was very funny. I write it down, I rip it out, I put it in the bin. This is where I'm saving tens of thousands of dollars in psychoanalysis every year. It's all in the bin. So this time, Nikki's got a job with the Nashville Public Library Foundation, where coincidentally I am on the board. I have a cold and I keep drying out. So Nikki and I are a lot alike. We're very bossy and we stay on something. And she became the cattle dog at my heel. Even as she had a job, she wouldn't let it go. She was always just, have you read the book? Have you read the book? You're going to read the essays. We're going to do this. We're going to do this book. We're going to do this book. So I did finally read it. And I thought about 2/3 of it was absolute trash. And I took it out and I threw it away. But there was some good stuff in there. There was a little chunk. If I could have published 100 pages of essays, I could have done a good job. One of the things that I don't like about books of essays in general is that, and it's why if you look at the cover of that book, the word essay does not appear, because nobody wants to read a book of essays. Nobody wants to read a book of essays, in large part because books of essays are bad. And the reason that they're bad is because somebody has 2 or 3 or 4 brilliant essays, and you read them and they're so good, they blow your mind, but then as the book goes on, it dies out and it becomes letters to the editor and book reviews, and it's dull. And there's nothing worse than a book that you begin to love so passionately and then it falls away as you are reading. That to me is much more painful than a book that is just mediocre all the way through. So I think that often books of essays betray us. And I was very interested in the idea of writing a book of essays that might one, be good all the way through, that could be thematic, and that would have an arch, that would have a structural narrative arch like a novel, and the plot would take you somewhere along. So at this point, I'm saying, no book of essays, but I'm also thinking, and I'm pulling things out, and then every time somebody calls and asks me to write an essay, I'm thinking, what is the book missing? Because even though now my fiction's doing well, I've got money, I realize that I actually really love writing nonfiction. It's a real joy for me to have a project that is limited in time, that's not going on for 2 or 3 years, but maybe going on for 2 or 3 weeks or 2 or 3 days. So I keep accepting assignments, and right about this time, I get 2 very big assignments, bigger than I've ever had. One is for Byliner, and they asked me to write a really long, like a 50-page essay on anything I want, and this is the best thing, the best gift I've ever given myself was this essay. I wrote an essay called The Getaway Car, and it is every single piece of writing advice I have in the world. It is about creativity and how I got started and how I work and how I feel about MFA programs and how to find an agent and how to get published and how to just live and be a writer and make every single thing I know is there, so that when somebody raises their hand and says, how do I find an agent? When somebody comes up to the table and says, I have 100 pages of my book written, what should I do now? I can say, I've got this essay and I can give it to you. My husband is a doctor. When he comes home and says, I have a patient who came in today and her daughter is 12 and she thinks she might want to be a gymnast or a novelist, and my patient would like you to have lunch with this child once a week until she goes to college because she thinks she might want to be a novelist, I can say, read this. And if you have any questions after, I would be more than happy to have lunch with you. No one ever has any questions. So I really nailed that. So now I have this one big essay. And at the same time, I get a call from Audible. And Audible wants to do something called an Audible Original. I'm going to be their first Audible Original. And for all I know, they're last. I've never looked at Audible, so I don't. Audible just makes me want to kill myself. Anytime I've ever tried to download an audiobook, that's the kind of thing Nikki did for me. She would download an audiobook for me because I absolutely can't do that. So they wanted me to write a 50-page essay about anything. And I said, yes, of course, I'll do it. And then I go to Nikki, I say, I don't have no idea. I don't know what to write another 50-page, the one 50-page essay I've already written. She said, write an essay about your marriage. She said, you and Carl are the only really happily married people that I know. And all my friends were in our 20s, our parents are divorced, we're having crummy internet dating relationships. Give me some hope. Show me what a happy marriage looks like. Write that down. And so I thought, well, that's a really good idea. So I wrote This is the Story of a Happy Marriage, which turns out to be a 50-page essay about the history of divorce in my family. Because every single person in my family, on both sides, for as far as the eye can see, in every direction, we are all divorced. This is genetically our specialty. My husband is also divorced. When we started dating, he and his wife hadn't been divorced for very long, and they had 2 kids. And I was just amazed by what rank amateurs they were. They didn't know anything about getting divorced. Their parents hadn't been divorced. Their siblings hadn't been divorced. It was like they didn't even know divorced people. And I was like, I love Carl's first wife. And, I was always kind of going to them separately saying, no, this isn't how you do it. This is how you do, got to do this. We've got to plan for the future. We have to plan for the day that we will all have Thanksgiving together, because we will, and we have. So, anyway, I write all that down. Now I have my anchor stores, because I have come to see the book of essays as a shopping mall. And I realize that what I have had are a lot of boutique stores. But now I have my Macy's and I have my Bloomingdale's. And I start to think about, well, now what else would I want to put in? I would want to write a very long piece about the Los Angeles Police Department. I had decided when I was 30 years old that I was going to try out for the Los Angeles Police Department and write a book about being a cadet. My father had been a cop in LA for 33 years and had been involved in some very interesting cases, and I was fascinated. I didn't grow up with my father. I was very fascinated by the police department. So I took the test, I got into the LAPD. I decided we were going to write this book, and everything, I would come home at the end of the day and say to my father, this happened, and he would say, that's fascinating, you cannot write about that. And I kept saying, Dad, I want to write this book to make you happy. I want to write this book to get to know you. And my father would say, you're going to have to spend 2 years on the force before you can write this book. I'm never going to be a cop. He said, if you spent 2 years on the force, then you could go into the FBI. And that would be amazing. And what I realized over time was that I had thought my father was very supportive of me doing this book, but in fact, he just really wanted me to be a cop. So I had unbelievably beautiful, careful notes and nothing to do with them. So now I dig those out. I write that piece. I write a long piece about my nun. I have my own nun. And the book really starts to take shape. And I think it's a good book. It's very important to me that I never publish a book that I don't feel is better than my last book. And this is the book that I really love. But I can't publish. I can't send it in. I can't do it. And the reason is I have been all my life an inside person. And what that means is that I have a big wall in my life that blocks things out so that I can have privacy and quiet and time to write and be a novelist, and that I can sort of withdraw into my quiet world. I have a lot of boundaries. And then something happened 2 years ago that destroyed all of that, that broke every single boundary in my life and took me from being an inside person to being an outside person. And that was I opened a bookstore. And what happened was that in 2010, we had 2 bookstores in Nashville. One was a 30,000 square foot Borders. The other was a 30,000 square foot bookstore named Davis Kidd, which had been our locally owned and operated independent bookseller. It was bought by a chain out of Ohio. They moved it into the mall. They put candles and muffins and watering cans and wind chimes and bottles of hand lotion in front of every book in the store. And we tried to pretend it was our local independent, but it was gone. Both of these stores were profitable in Nashville every month they were open. 60,000 square feet of retail shopping space. Both stores were closed 6 months apart. Both stores were closed at a corporate level. All the Borders stores closed. 8 out of 10 of the Joseph Best stores closed. Nashville, we have no bookstore, gnashing, rending, wailing, committee meetings, we've got to open a bookstore, and nobody is opening a bookstore. And I sat around and I just waited, right? Somebody's going to open a bookstore, not me. I'm not going to go into retail. There's a story here that I want to tell. It's a little bit disgusting. But it was really one of those moments that changed my life. Of the many countless hundreds of junkie magazine pieces that I have written, I once wrote the Oprah's aha column. You know what I'm talking about? You have your Oprah aha moment. This was my Oprah aha moment. When I was 19 years old, I went to Harvard summer school, and there were 3 girls, other girls, there were 4 of us living in the suite, and there were a lot of cockroaches, if any of you have ever been to Harvard. They were well-educated, but they were disgusting. And one night at about 11 o'clock, I got out of bed and I stepped on a bug that was huge, huge. And it shot out from under my foot, and it was running around, and the other girls all came out, and we were screaming and running around. And I'm not talking about a normal size bug. You're just gonna have to believe me, this thing was beyond terrifying. And we corral it into the bathroom, and we roll up a towel, and we shove it under the door, and we're like, what are we gonna do? And I said, I'm gonna go get security. So I go outside, and I find an elderly security guard. This bug. And he comes back to the room, and he's in the bathroom, and we're all huddled up. And he opens the door, and it's in the shower, and he looks in the shower, and he looks at the bug, and he looks back at us, and he looks at the bug, and he looks at me, and he says, ladies, you are on your own. And he leaves. And I look at the three weeping, cowering, trembling girls behind me, and I thought, damn, I'm going to have to kill that bug. And that was what opening the bookstore was like. And that was a real lesson from 12 years of Catholic school. You know, the nuns used to always say, if you see trash on the ground and you think, whose job is that to pick that trash up? It's your job. At the moment you can formulate the sentence, whose job is that to, it's you, it's your job. So whose job is that to open an independent bookstore? Well, it turns out it was my job. I was introduced to a woman named Karen Hayes in April of 2011. We had a mutual friend. She wanted to open a bookstore. She was going to work in the bookstore, devote her life to the bookstore, and on meeting after one sandwich, we decided that we would throw in together. She didn't have any money. I would pay for the bookstore, I would promote the bookstore, and she would work in the bookstore and run the bookstore, and we would be partners. At this point, I become like crazy famous. Book selling, novels, all of that, that's fine. Turns out, chicken feed. I am now on the Colbert Report talking about independent book selling, not because I'm a writer. These people don't even know that I write books. They invited me on because I am a famous independent bookseller. Time magazine, one of the 100 most influential people in the world last year, because I opened a 2,500 square foot bookstore between a donut den and a nail emporium. And I was so out there, standing up on benches, going to Rotary clubs, giving speeches, going on the Today Show, giving interviews in Bangladesh about bookstore, the importance of bookstores. It became so much more than Parnassus. It really became that I was the spokesperson for independent book selling. And it was a job that I hadn't applied for and didn't know that I wanted. But it was very important to me because I published Patron Saint of Liars in 1992. I've been on book tour since 1992. And the people who have supported me and been my friends and made my career and made sure that you got a copy of my book were independent booksellers. And now I was, being called to serve. And I really cared about it so much that I was willing to give up private life, indoor life. And at that point, I thought, I can publish this book. It doesn't make any difference now. Everything is out there. Everything about me is known. If I get my hair cut, they run something about it in the local paper. Basically, the three women that you most want to see in Whole Foods in Nashville are me, Nicole Kidman, and Connie Britton. And the interesting thing is, I think about this book as being a story about work and commitment. This is the story of a happy marriage. Marriage being a very large word for the things that I feel fully committed to. Book selling, writing, art, love, family, dogs, friendship. Those are the things that are bedrock to me, the things to which the marriage vows apply. Do you promise to love and honor and cherish sickness, health, better, worse, long as you? That's not just for marriage. I mean, those words really apply to certain things in our life. I will stay with this forever. This is what I care about. There is in our culture such a celebration of the artist, the tortured young artist, the passionate, crazed, inspired, muse-whispered artist. In the same way that if we see love portrayed in books, in movies, it's about falling in love. It's about seeing you as I cross the street and everything in my life changes, and it's this passion that's bigger than the world. But it's really interesting over here on the other side, and this is what I have decided. That creativity is a match, that passion is a match, that being with someone for 20 years, that making your living as a novelist is about living in a warm house for all that time. The relationship between 20 years in a warm house and a match is your willingness to split wood. And that is what I feel like I've been doing. And it's so much better. we tend to believe that the best thing that could happen would be that we would buy the lucky ticket and that we would win the lottery. But the things that in life that are really beautiful, that are really so meaningful, are things like taking care of your 96-year-old grandmother who's dying of Alzheimer's. The really hard day in, day out work is the stuff that gives us life, the love that you're not falling into, but that you can count on, the work that you don't believe comes from the muse or can be blocked by writer's block, but the work that you show up and do day after day after day, to me, is so rewarding. So that becomes the arc of the book and all of the things that I put together. What's interesting, though, is going back to altruism, because I thought I was doing Nikki such a favor. And let me tell you, no way in the world would this book exist. If you like this book, you thank Nikki Castle. There is no way I would have done it. There is no way I would have done it if I had just taken the manuscript from her, if she hadn't just kept after me day after day for more than a year. Now, it probably goes without saying, Nikki is now the events and marketing director of the bookstore. In the same way, when I opened the bookstore, I thought it was an altruistic act. I thought that I was doing something very civic for my city that I loved, because my city couldn't not have a bookstore. And so I'd eat it, I'd take the loss, I'd spend my money in the same way you gotta bail out the symphony or whatever, because we have to do it. I never thought about all of the things that would come back to me. For one thing, I get to see all my friends now, because they're all authors, they're all on tour. I not only get to see my friends, I get to meet my heroes. Isabel Allende comes to the store, all these writers that I love who I'm getting to meet, and that is a huge addition to my life. I have this place where basically I employ my best friends. All the people in the store I love. I go in the morning, they're in the back room, there are 3 or 4 people, they're having a fight, very heated argument. What's going on? What's wrong? They're trying to decide which Evelyn Waugh novel is their favorite. My dog, Sparky, is the store dog. I'm not there every day. I just come over, I open the door, Sparky goes in. All day long, he goes, he pets, he sees people, he sits on the front mat, he interacts, kids pull his ears. He's a brilliant dog. I would have opened that store just for Sparky, just to give him some place to go. But the very, very best thing that's come out of this altruistic act and has paid me back, the thing that I really never thought about, is that I can force strangers to read the books I love. Now, we're all here, and we are all here, I assume, because we are all readers, and we love books. So you'll know that what I'm talking about when I say, I will read a book, I will love a book. It is a huge, deep, personal experience, me and the book, but it is not complete until I can say to someone, read this book. You have to read this book, right? I mean, isn't that the joy? You've got to read this book. I have been making my friends and family members read the books that I love since I learned how to read. Now I have an ever-changing flow of life coming through this store, and I go in and I'll say, oh, I'm sorry, ma'am, I just saw you walking past Karen Joy Fowler's We Are All Completely Beside Ourselves. That is the book for you. And I know you were looking for the restroom, but Toni Mara's Constellation of Vital Phenomenon, I love this book. Let's just sit down for a second and talk about this book. And people in Nashville are kind of scared of me because, as Nikki likes to say, it's because you're scary. But, you know, if I tell people to buy a book, they'll buy a book. It's not that I am looking to make a sale. In fact, the other booksellers are always in the back going, oh, God. But it's that I passionately want people to read the books I love. I can remember when I was in college, I met a Hare Krishna in the airport. And they don't have Hare Krishnas in the airport anymore, but it was in Chicago, and we spent like a 2-hour layover together. And he said to me, everybody runs away from me. Everybody's afraid of me. He said, imagine how it would feel to love God so much that you wanted to share that enormous love in you, the best, brightest thing in your life. You wanted to share it with someone as a gift, and everyone ran away from you. And that's kind of what book selling is like, except no one runs away from me. Except people take the book and they're grateful because they came to the bookstore to find a book. Now, when I went out on tour for State of Wonder, my last book, it was when we were putting the store together, but we hadn't opened yet. And I really wanted to sort of test my chops as a bookseller. So I got a novel that I deeply loved called The All of It. That's 4 words, by Jeanette Hayne. It was out of print. Jeanette Hayne is dead. I found it in a box in a used bookstore in Woods Hole, Massachusetts. It was mildewy. It made me sneeze. It was $0.25. A friend of mine bought it for me. It had originally been published by HarperCollins. It was my publisher. And so I thought, I want to get this book back in print. I'm going to write a foreword for it, and I'm going to take it with me. And every night while I'm on book tour with State of Wonder, I'm going to sell this book and see how I do. So, The All of It by Jeanette Hayne is our #1 best-selling title at Parnassus Books. We keep a big, and it sells more than my books, which, you know, we sell a lot of those. We keep a big stack on the checkout desk, and if someone checks out, we say, have you read The All of It? If they say no, we're like, you might as well get it now, because sooner or later, you're going to get it, and then you're going to come back the way everybody comes back, and you're going to get 10 copies of it. It will take you 3 hours to read. It's 130 pages. It is smart. It is emotionally complex. It is a very complex plot. And if you're in a book club and it's December coming up and you don't feel like reading Anna Karenina because you're really busy, but you want to still feel smart and have something you can really sink your teeth into and have an adult conversation about, The All of It by Jeanette Hayne. So the book that I got this time to get put back in print is my very, very favorite book of essays called A Day at the Beach by Jeffrey Wolf. Good book, and this is a very sort of borderline sexist weird thing for me to say. Very good book for men. Now, I sort of feel as a bookseller, in my experience, women will read all sorts of things. Women will love this book. That's kind of a given. It's not necessarily a given that the men will read the women's book. It's more of a given that the women will read the men's book. At any rate, Jeffrey Wolf is Tobias Wolff's brother. Their parents got divorced when they were very young. The mother took Toby, the father took Jeffrey. Jeffrey wrote a fabulous memoir about his father called The Duke of Deception. Toby wrote a fabulous memoir about his mother called This Boy's Life. These 2 books, by the way, are on sale out in the lobby because I bring them with me everywhere I go. What I realized when I was reading this book is that most people who are writers are not very interesting. And that's because we're inside people. We stay in and protect our life and our time. When writers are interesting, they're usually interesting on assignment. They're interesting because someone is paying them to be interesting. Jeffrey Wolf is an interesting person who led a thrilling, adventuresome life. Most people who are interesting and lead thrilling, adventuresome lives aren't writers because they don't want to sit down at their desk or they just don't think in that way. He's a brilliant writer, brilliant thinker, and has such a phenomenal well of life to draw from. And I love this book. You might think it's a little weird that I would be recommending that you buy a paperback book of essays that I can tell you is better than the hardback book of essays that I wrote. But that is because I am now fully a bookseller. And I want you to have the very best book. In my store, not only will I give you the books that I think you should read, I will also take away from you books that I don't think you should read. For example, let me see the extent to which I am going on. I'm doing okay, actually. I'll tell this and then we'll go to questions. I saw a young woman in the store in her early 20s, and she's walking around with a copy of The Beautiful and the Damned. I walk up to her. I say, wow, The Beautiful and the Damned. Man, you are some kind of F. Scott Fitzgerald fan. And she says, oh, no, it's my first one. Well, the story ends right there if The Beautiful and the Damned is the first F. Scott Fitzgerald book you read. The only people who should ever read The Beautiful and the Damned are the people who are doing their doctoral thesis on F. Scott Fitzgerald. It's a terrible book. So I say, you know, read The Great Gatsby, read tender as the night. You don't start here. You end here. She says, my roommate said it was the best one. I said, well, your roommate's a fool. You know, you get the Gatsby, start at the right place. That's a kindness, right? That's looking out for someone. Recently, a man came up to me. I did not come up. I saw that he was holding a book I did not approve of, but I did not bother him. He came up to me. He said, I know who you are, and I'm in a men's book club, which is great. And he said, one of our favorite books, best discussion we ever had 5 years ago, Atonement. He said, now we're ready to read a new Ian McEwan book. Getting this one. No, sir. No, sir, you don't want that one. You want Enduring Love. That's the good Ian McEwan book, not the one whose name we cannot mention. And what was really funny is I told this story once before, and like people were coming up to the signing desk saying, is it this one? Is it this one? Is it this one? Okay, so then there's also the time that maybe you don't need to take away the book, but it's not the right book. I have a display in the store of, the Anne's Recommends stack. And 2 of the books that I recommended this woman was buying, she was checking out with Anthony Marra's Constellation of Vital Phenomenon. Think that was the book of the year for me. And Kevin Powers' Yellow Birds. So those are both 2 very, very tough books. Highly recommend you bite the bullet and read them. The Constellation of Vital Phenomenon is about the war in Chechnya. If I could think of something I would less rather do than read a novel about the war in Chechnya, I cannot imagine it. But the book is so compelling, so beautifully done, so important that it sails me through. Kevin Powers is about the war in Afghanistan. He was a young gunner, and he came back at 23 and wrote this fabulous book. So the woman is checking out with these 2 books that I love, and I say, good for you. I am so glad to see that you are reading these 2 fantastic books. And she says, yes. My daughter is in labor. I'm from Chicago. I just came down. She's going to have a baby, and I'm going to read these books in the delivery room while I'm waiting. No. You're going to read Where'd You Go, Bernadette? Yeah, right? Happy, fast, couple of laughs, put it down anywhere, pick it, contraction, put it down, little lull, pick it back up again. So it's all about relationships. It's all about bringing together the books and the people. My kind of closing message in all of this, and this is why I am the spokesperson for independent booksellers, is that for some reason I'm the person who gets to go around the country and say this. Amazon doesn't get to make all of the decisions about what we do in our life. And we get to make those decisions by how and where we choose to spend our money. I really believe that people are good. In an almost Pollyanna-ish way, I believe there is a basic goodness in people. But I also believe that people are stupid and that they're thoughtless. And what happens is, we think that we can do something and no one else is doing it, right? So, we can go into a little independent bookstore and go to the author reading and read the flap copy and talk to the smart sales staff and take our kids to story hour and hang out and have a cup of coffee and then go home with all of that love and joy and buy our book for $4 less on Amazon. I don't have any problem with you using Amazon if you want to stay home and just be in relationship to your screen. But the fact is, we need a community center, and we need libraries, we need bookstores, we need parks. It's kind of all one and the same. And the only way we have these things is if we support them and we take responsibility for them. I grew up in the South, and when I was growing up, I believed that Walmart killed small towns and that Walmart was a bad thing. After I opened a bookstore, I don't have any problem with Walmart. I don't think Walmart's a bad thing. We did it. Walmart didn't kill anything. Walmart came in to Carthage, Tennessee, where my cousins lived, where my cousin was a pharmacist, and they offered cotton balls for 30 cents less a bag. And we chose to buy our cotton balls from Walmart instead of from our neighbor. And that's what killed the towns. So we're really at a crossroads right now where we have the chance with how we spend our money to change the face of corporate America and the way we live our lives. If what bookstores offer matter to you, shop at a bookstore. You've got some beautiful ones, independent booksellers selling books here tonight. And that is the good news according to Ann Patchett. If we can have lights up, then we can do, wait. If you have to clap at the end. You have to clap after the questions, and I don't want you to wear yourself out. So let's do the do the cue thing.
If you'll put your hands up, but before you do, I want to, can I?
Yes, please.
Okay, so the winners of tickets to upcoming programs, please see me afterwards. Amy Siegel, can I see Amy? Where are you? Amy?
Yay. Hi, Amy.
And Rick Levinson. Rick, oh good.
Hey.
So I will give you your tickets. So now, who has a question for Ann Patchett? Series there, I'm here, I'm coming to you.
Oh my gosh, like half of us in the store have that dress.
Oh, really? Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
Are you
It's got little tiny books all over it.
Yes.
I love that dress.
Thank you. So my question is, with the fiction, particularly Bel Canto and State of Wonder, how much travel research goes into writing those type of books?
I did. You read my 2 South American books, and I did go to South America for both of those books. And interestingly enough, I went to Peru. Excuse me. I have a cold, and I have this amazing ability to make it all the way to Q&A, and then I sort of break apart. I did my research in Peru for both of those books, even though State of Wonder is set in Brazil, because I wanted to go down the river in a certain kind of boat that I couldn't find in Brazil, but in Peru they had that kind of boat, which is its own funny story. I could have written both of those books without going to South America, but I could also take it off my taxes, and and it was fun. I mean, 2 hours in the Amazon would be enough to write a lifetime worth of novels. I mean, the imagery was just unbelievable. So, you know, the answer is yes, I did. I do my research usually either in the middle of a book or the end, and then I use the research to correct myself, because if I do the research up front, I never stop doing research. And it becomes the La Brea tar pits. I know if I'm writing about evolutionary biology, which I did in State of Wonder and also in Run, all you do when you start reading The Voyage of the Beagle is to discover how much you don't know about evolutionary biology. So my theory is go ahead, write it wrong, and then take your trip, do what you need to do, correct yourself. Thank you.
Next question is up here in the back end.
Okay.
Hi, I confess, sorry, that's really loud. I confess that I haven't read any interviews with you about being a new bookseller, so if you've addressed this, I apologize. But I'm curious, as both an author and a bookseller, how you feel about vanity and self-publishing, and especially how it has changed when it's become so easy with e-publishing.
How I feel about vanity self-publishing. Well, let's take the word vanity out, because then that sort of sets up how we feel about it right away. What happens, and you know, I'll add this to the long list of things I never thought about as a bookseller. People who have self-published books want to sell their books in your store. And we get just avalanches of people sending us self-published books because they want a venue. And that's the problem with self-publishing. People who believe that, oh, I can just publish my book on Amazon, or take it and have it printed up at one of those little espresso machines or cappuccino machines. Honestly, what is it called? It's espresso? Okay, where they self-print your book, and then they want you to carry it. But publishing is a really big arc of editing, marketing, publicity, art, design, all of those things put together. We will carry in our store local people who have self-published if there really seems to be an audience for the book. Otherwise, it's kind of overwhelming. As far as self-publishing is concerned on, say, Amazon, I think the best example is the 50 Shades of Grey books, and that those were written 10 years before, and they didn't get better in those 10 years that they were hanging out online. But you really become a needle in the haystack. And there's kind of no way for anybody to find you. I think that it's fine. I don't have any judgment against it, but there's no way that I would be able to read and sell all the self-published books that come through the store. So,
The next question's over here to your left.
Two-part question on both related to you in Tennessee. One is, how do you look like you're 30 all the time? If you're
it's
really
you know
50?
it's the blinding light.
Yeah, is it?
It
Stand away
blanches
from the white, then maybe. You know. Oh, you look
She
30.
just gets-
You look 31
She
now.
gets old.
My other question: you used your contrast of good with stupid. How come Tennessee sends so many stupid people to the Senate?
Oh man, you know, it's so funny. I don't know, and the thing is, I know those people. One of them is a neighbor of mine, like a block away. It's different in the South. It really is, and it's hard, and I can't take responsibility for it. And I don't think it's going to change, but it's a whole different world down there. And Nashville is to Tennessee what Austin is to Texas. You know, we're the one little liberal bastion, but it's, you know, I know Al Gore, man. We lost it for him. We did. Tennessee did. His home state. It's very embarrassing. I'm sorry.
We have another
Yes.
question up in the back.
Hi.
Hi.
I love Patron Saint of Liars. It's
I'll
an
take
amazing
your word for
book.
it. I haven't read it. I don't know.
Can you tell a story about the inspiration for that book?
Oh, sure. The story for that I remember. The story for the inspiration of the Patron Saint of Liars. I was 25 years old and I left my husband, and very abruptly and fast. And that's when I moved back to Nashville and got a job as a waitress. And while I was waiting tables, I would make up this story. And I mean, this talk about in the category of too much information. But I was so glad that we didn't have kids. I was so glad that we didn't have any money. We didn't have a cat. We didn't have anything. I just picked up my purse and left, and with a sense of urgency. And so it was just in my mind all the time, what if you really wanted to get out of a marriage and you were pregnant? What would you do? What would you do then? What would you do then? And that from that point, it spins out to somebody who's totally not me, to circumstances that are totally not me, but that was definitely the germ of that story. And while I was rolling silverware, every night before you left Fridays, you had to roll 150 packets of silverware, and you had to marry the ketchup. Do you know what marrying ketchup is? Yeah, where you balance the bottle. The bottom 95% of any ketchup bottle has been there since 1979. And they just keep putting the top on it again and again. That was me. And so I'd be like, okay, she's pregnant, she's going to California, whacking on the ketchup, and that was it.
Next question's over here.
I absolutely loved Bel Canto.
Thank you.
And thought it was enchanting. And I was at one time a professional musician and really wonder about your fascination, obviously, with opera. Have you studied music? How did you know so much about the opera, or did you do the research later?
I did the research. I am a professional imaginer. I don't know anything about much of anything. It's shocking. But when I was writing that book, I had never been to an opera. I'd never listened to opera. I had no relationship with music whatsoever. But I decided that this character was going to be an opera singer for the sort of universality of voice and transcendence of language. And I gave myself a crash course in opera. I started going to the opera. I was reading all of these books, listening. When I finished the book, 30 people sent it to Renee Fleming and said, someone has written a novel about you. And she called me up, which wasn't true, because I didn't know enough to have it be Renee. Although in retrospect, there are certainly things that I can see. And we became very good friends, and we often travel together. And I mean, I'm like a famous opera person now. I could really go into any opera house in the world and say, would you tell the general manager Ann Patchett is here? And they would be like, nah. It's phenomenal. Renee is now the artistic director of the Chicago Lyric Opera, and the first thing she's mounting is an original production of Bel Canto, which is, but don't hold your breath, or as I say, don't buy your dress yet. It's supposed to be in the winter of 2015. This is the third time that people have tried to make it into an opera. It has twice almost been a Broadway musical. It has been about 58 different films, as they have all fallen apart. And things fall apart.
Did you want to say something about not personalizing?
Did I? Yes, I do. I am normally somebody who would write, "I love you, Aunt Sally," all over your books, but for two reasons. One, I am running a fever, and two, there are 400 of us, and we will be here until 1 in the morning. So what I'm going to do, for reasons of my health and also not infecting you, is if you open the book up to the title page and walk up, I will sign my name and the date, and you'll say, "That was really fun," and I'll say, "Thank you," and you'll say, "Feel better," and I'll say, "I'm going to try." And in some ways it's disappointing, and I'm really sorry. And in other ways, if you're at the back of this line, you're going to be so much happier. So I think at about 150 is as far as I can go with that. Anyway,
Thank you
be sure
to
to get
you.
these.
Oh, I was going to steal them.
Oh, Day at the Beach, all of it. Read, support your local independent bookstore.
Thank you so much. Thanks to all of you. Thanks so much to Ann
Thank you.
Patchett.
Thank you.